We're just going to keep going. Now I'm just going to take a little aside here, because there's always some interesting players that keep cropping up in these things. You know, it's amazing how many times you'll find that Shaney, Rumsfeld, Walkovich, John Bolton, you know, all of these guys, you know, crop up time and time again through events that involve the United States. Well, there are players as well behind the scenes who always crop up. And here's one, a lady called Jamie Gorelick. She's a former vice chairman of Fannie Mae, which, as you'll know, has been subject to major investigation, and fundamentally major fraud has transpired and been quietly buried. Well, up until the end of April, Jamie Gorelick was a main board member of Schlumberger. But then she resigned. And the reason she resigned is because the law firm she works for represents BP. And so 1 week after the blowout, she decided that remaining on the board of Schlumberger, whilst her law firm represented BP, was a conflict of interests. How could she have known that 1 week into the events? I mean, you know, basically it was an unfortunate accident. You know, how could she, and Schlumberger weren't really involved, apparently. How could she have considered it to be a conflict of interest? Well, this lady is a safe pair of hands. She is the protege of a guy called John Deutsch, who was also a main board member of Schlumberger. John Deutsch was a member, well, he's former head of CIA, but he's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He initiated Jamie Gorelick into the Council on Foreign Relations. Many of you will know that 60% of the people who sat on the 9/11 Commission have all gone public and said the 9/11 Commission was a fraud, and basically, you know, was totally inappropriate because the information that they were being given was totally inadequate and was doctored. This is the lady who was tasked with filtering the information that was fed through to the 9/11 Commission. A safe pair of hands. So, company men. Let's go and take a look at the company men, because obviously I'm focusing very heavily on the company man here, because it was the BP company man that told Halliburton to pump the job with only 8 spacers, not 23. It was a BP company man that told Schlumberger that he wasn't going to shut in the well, despite the best advice in the business. By the way, I've got to tell you actually something else about the Schlumberger guys. The Schlumberger guys, when the BP company man refused to close in the well, the Schlumberger guys were spooked. The official story, put out by BP, and not contradicted officially by Schlumberger, is that the Schlumberger guys left the rig on a scheduled helicopter at 11 o'clock on the morning of April 20th. The unofficial story, not challenged by BP, and not challenged by Schlumberger, because I put it out into the public domain, because of my inside sources, is that the Schlumberger guys were so spooked that they called their manager in New Orleans. And every Schlumberger manager basically has worked the rig, so you know he wouldn't have needed to have a long explanation of what the problem was. The Schlumberger manager realised the magnitude of the problem, chartered a helicopter, had it flown out to the rig, and lifted these guys off the rig. And everybody agrees that the Schlumberger guys left the rig at 11 o'clock in the morning. 10 hours later, of course, boom, the rig closed. The company man. This is the senior company man. This arguably is the most experienced company man in the BP fleet. It's a guy called Ronald Sepulvedo. And this is him appearing before one of the early hearings. 6 years on the BP Deepwater Horizon, he would have known every facet, every strength, every weakness about that rig. So why on earth was he taken off the rig 4 days before the explosion? And this is him before the hearing, and basically he's saying, I don't know why I was taken off. I was told I had to attend a course. Well, the course he had to attend was held in Lafayette, Louisiana, and it was a course on the safe operation of the BOP, the blowout preventer. Now, why would the most experienced company man in the BP fleet be taken off the rig to learn the safe use of the BOP at the most effective, at the most significant moment of the operation? And basically, the guy's going, I don't know. I don't know. He was obviously told, you're off the rig. The hierarchy told him he was off the rig. Now his counterpart, because the guys on the rig worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off, His counterpart is a guy called Donald Vidrine. Donald Vidrine had been on the rig for about 6 months. So still fairly experienced, but obviously not as experienced as Sepulveda. So who replaced Sepulveda? Well, Sepulveda was taken off the rig and replaced with a guy called Bob Kaluza. Now, nobody really knows very much about Bob Kaluza. I mean, you can find bits and pieces that have been written about him, but he was 32. But we really don't know very much about his experience within BP. But this is the guy that, as far as I'm concerned, is the most important, to use the Gulf hearings terminology, person of interest. Person of interest. This is the guy that the Gulf Coast hearings need to ask some very, very pertinent and poignant questions. But he's pleaded the Fifth. The Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which enables a US citizen to refuse to give evidence on the grounds that any evidence they may give may be self-incriminating. So he's refused to appear, pleading the Fifth, and Donald Vidrine is sick. I'll bet he's sick. Bet he's sick. Now, the reason these guys are in silhouette is because when I first realised that Kaluza was my man, I did discover a website and I had some photographs of these guys, and I logged the URLs, I bookmarked the URLs to go back and get the photographs a couple of days later when I was pulling all the data together. I'll never do that again, because when I went back, the photographs were gone. Now, I've given this presentation probably 20 plus times since July, when I first made this observation, and nobody who has attended any of the presentations has been able to track down photographs of either Kaluza or Vidrine. So BP have managed to eradicate all photographic evidence of these guys, just like they've managed to eradicate all reference of the DVD of this on the Amazon website. I know it's still there because I can go into my seller account and I can find it. But if you, even if you Google Ian Crane BP on the Amazon search tool, it comes up with nothing. That doesn't happen by happenstance. So these are the guys that I really would focus on. Now, the only way in which these guys can actually be forced to give evidence, and all the players can be called to give evidence, is if the Gulf Coast hearings, which are being chaired by the US Coast Guard, under the direction, I think, of Admiral Thad Allen, the only way in which they can be called to attend is if the Gulf Coast hearing is given power of subpoena. Now, obviously, the Gulf Coast hearings, the Coast Guard realised that basically, if they just asked people to attend, they weren't necessarily going to attend. So, of course, they put it before the House of Representatives to get a bill passed to give the power of subpoena to the Gulf Coast hearings. That bill was passed in the House of Representatives by 420 votes to 1. So it sailed through the House of Representatives. Let's take a look at what happened at the second reading of the Gulf Coast, the bill to give the Gulf Coast hearing power of subpoena when it went before the Senate.
S3462, a bill to provide subpoena power to the National Commission on the British Petroleum Oil Spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and that the Senate then proceed to its consideration.
Is there objection?
On behalf of other members of the Republican Conference, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President?
Senator from New Hampshire.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 442 H.R. 5481, a bill to give subpoena power to the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling. That the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motion to consider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. Legislation that passed the House 420 to 1.
Is there objection?
On behalf of other members of the Republican Conference, I object.
The objection is heard.
Madam President,
Senator from New Hampshire.
I don't understand what is so objectionable. In the House, 169 Republicans voted in favor of giving the Presidential Commission subpoena power. They understand how important that is, because this commission begins their investigation in the next few weeks. This should not be a partisan issue. I don't understand why my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are turning this into a partisan issue. I find it unbelievable that after everything the people of the Gulf region have endured and that this entire country has witnessed for over 2 months now, that anyone is still standing with the oil company that caused this disaster instead of the victims who are suffering from it.